So I'd like to welcome our first guest on these new series of podcasts, Rebecca Lees, who is a writer and walker, and she has a fantastic blog called Girl on the Trail, which has I visited that, and it's a vast plethora of information and resources and inspirations. And recently she was also awarded the Ordnance Survey Get Outside Champion, which perhaps Rebecca can tell us all about that. She's also written books about heritage walks and trails for children. And she's going to explore her love of walking and what she feels it can do for our mental health and well-being this afternoon. So thanks very much for joining us, Rebecca. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it'd be nice to start back at the beginning, perhaps, and perhaps you can explain to us how you got into this. It's obviously a huge part of your life now. Perhaps the inception of you and walking and nature and how it made you feel, perhaps. Is that a good place to start, perhaps?
Yeah. I think looking back, it sounds like one of those idyllic 80s childhoods. It probably wasn't, but we seemed to be outdoors all the time. We'd be outside after school, we'd be outside all weekend, just hanging around in the park. So I've always been massively comfortable in the outdoors. I started hiking really with my dad when I was 8 years old, and I grew up in the Swansea Valley, and the upper Swansea Valley is still one of my favourite places for hiking. I lived a bit further down the valley, but that area above Cray, it's just so remote and bleak and beautiful. So we started hiking there when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and that really sparked something. It was really powerful and lovely.
Yeah, that's quite young, isn't it?
It
start, walking,
yeah.
And so, and then because a lot of us perhaps start things when we're young, if it's music or sport, and then sometimes we lose it when we perhaps fall in love or discover other things as teenagers. Did it carry on as a trajectory throughout your teenage years and into your young adulthood?
Throughout my teenage years, definitely. And I think, perhaps when my brother and sister got a bit fed up of it, I still loved being out hiking. I think it was that time with my dad that I really enjoyed. Didn't really matter what we were doing. It was just really lovely to be with him. I think, then I went to university, started work as a journalist in my 20s, and didn't get out as much as looking back I should have. I think I lost it, and I still loved hiking, if I had the time. But I think when you don't make it a priority, we rarely have the time to do it. So maybe I'd only really go out a couple of times a year to do a sort of mountain walk or something that I really enjoyed. So it wasn't until my 30s really that I came back to it, or it came back to me.
That's interesting. And was there a catalyst for that time where you rediscovered it, do you think? Was it the way life was perhaps for yourself, or was it an inspiration of someone, or
it was quite a slow catalyst, but there was a catalyst in my 30s. I think, like lots of people, life becomes quite challenging. I'd gone through loss and grief like lots of us do, and that was all around the time that my children were quite small. And I felt like I needed a way to kind of manage a few things that were going on. So at that point, when my children were quite small, I just started running. I'd been a rubbish runner all my life, dreadful in school, and I got into running just to get out a couple of times a week, just plod around the streets a bit. And then that became, I think that just triggered something without me really trying to overthink it. I think just on a very primal level, I knew I needed to be outdoors more. I knew I needed to be active and exercise more and be in nature.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think you used the word manage then, didn't you? I think that's interesting how those sort of activities, walking, swimming, cycling, perhaps running, like managing our inner mental states a bit and emotional states in a way of, just quite cathartic, I suppose, and getting away from things and thinking.
When I turned 40, I actually had a bit of an epiphany on my 40th birthday. I wasn't in a very good place. well, I was in Copenhagen, it was beautiful, but in the wrong sort of situation in life, and I decided to make some changes, and really realized that I needed to put the outdoors things into as much of a priority as other things in my life. I had to turn things around really, and not just get out if I had time, but to work out when I was going to be outside each week and work everything else around that.
Wow, that's quite a big moment then. That's quite like a religious conversion.
It was very powerful. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Which leads us in perhaps to the next question. In a way, is about the benefits really of this path you've taken now with exercise and walking in nature and writing the blog. Perhaps you could talk a bit about, perhaps from your own personal experience, how you feel the benefits of what it does to you, and then perhaps if by any stories of other people that have shared with you about how it's affected them, perhaps. That'd be really interesting.
I think I realized, sort of 4 or 5 years ago, that it's so important for my well-being, and if I think of my well-being really in sort of terms of a number of blocks, and they all have to work together. So it's the boring basics really, like getting lots of sleep and eating well, and I have taken antidepressants in my life as well, and they have been very beneficial. And for me, exercise goes hand in hand with those as one of those blocks, and if you take any one of them away, then I feel very anxious and fragile, and a lot more vulnerable, and I feel less strong, I think. I find that walking in particular often solves problems that I'm not trying to solve at that point. So I could sit at my desk all day and not be able to work something out or see the best way to do something, and then I go outside and walk a couple of miles, and the answers just sort of come, which is always lovely. So I think for me, it's just really central to being calm and managing the kind of feelings that we all have and the things that we all go through. And I was really privileged last year to be appointed one of Get Outside, one of the Get Outside champions, which is an initiative that Ordnance Survey runs. And there are 100 of us in all parts of the UK. And I know that they all feel those benefits as well. We all do slightly different things. There's runners and walkers and swimmers and people doing all kinds of crazy challenges, and they're very inspiring. But I think lots of us have gone through something quite pivotal in our lives, whether it's bereavement or divorce or trauma, and it's a way back, I think, after you've been through something quite monumental.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think a lot of people, you see stories cropping up, someone swimming around the coast of Britain, etc., and it comes from, like you said, a loss, a grief, something tragic in their lives, and it flips us over, into a positive edge. But it's a way of dealing with the process in it all, I suppose, and finding a sort of sense of purpose maybe as well. Yeah. Do you think specifically the last year that we've all lived through, do you think we've sort of, as a society, perhaps reassessed the importance of these sort of activities and therapies in a way, and do you think we can carry this on into the future, or do you think it's a little bit of a almost like a bit trendy at the moment, and we're all going to notice birds walk, etc., or how do you feel about the sort of zeitgeist of walking and these sort of therapies?
I feel that 2020 was probably the best of times and the worst of times in a way. So there's a lot of lockdown that I want to hold on to. And I have friends who I've seen them transform their view on life through lockdown by being outside and by making that time. And that's been really powerful. And I really hope that a lot of people do hang on to these things, and I think people will, because I feel like we've all seen now that we can work from home. So when we start going back to our offices, we'll probably only be doing that 2 or 3 days a week. I think people's lives have shifted, which is really positive. I think we've seen the worst of people being outside as well in the last year. There's huge problems with litter and wild camping, and people going out into the landscape and being very disrespectful. So I've struggled watching that really. So I think something has to change from here. I think that it's such an exciting time for more people to understand, you know, how to exercise safely, how to be outdoors. But I think we have to do a lot of work around responsibility, as well as it being a playground that's free for everybody, because that's not fair.
The question that, as you were talking then as well about, you know, because, you know, there's huge worries about young people's mental health, I think this time as well, you know, and this year particularly. And I wondered if you've got any experiences, because you've obviously written for children and young people. Do you lead walks for younger people, or is it based from your own parenting and just your love of walking? And I wondered what you feel about young people and walking, etc. From your experiences.
Well, from both points of view, really. So I've got teenagers, they are much more reluctant these days to come out walking with their boring old mum. But we do get out, and I see the difference in them. So when they were younger, they were really happy to be out walking with me, and that was lovely. And I think, you know, we live in such an age of screens, and they're fabulous, and there's lots of apps to help you get outside, which is brilliant. But I think we all need that time to switch off as well. So I wanted to write the Walking Trails books really for children. Actually, I was thinking more of physical health. Excuse me, at that point I was becoming very aware of the obesity crisis and how many families aren't very active. So that's why I pitched the idea of writing family trails books. But having written them and seen people's reactions to them, I'm seeing that people are far more aware of the mental health benefits of walking, which is lovely. You know, you see families having that light bulb moment, and that's really lovely. So I lead very informal walks. I try to get, you know, friends with children out as much as we can, and I organised a walk, I think it was the end of 2019, for children in need. We did the Country File ramble, which was really successful, and that was lovely. And my friends brought along her children, and one of them still says that was his favourite day in his little life, which is astonishing. But we found lots of puddles. They got very wet and muddy. I probably wasn't very popular with the mum, but it's really lovely seeing children have that reaction. Because it's so simple. It's just so simple. It's free, it's easy, and it's lovely.
And it can plant those seeds of the future, like what happened when you were 8 and you went out with your dad. It's that cycle, I think. Do you think schools can play a big part in this as well? Do you think, with the curriculum and, you know, getting children out into nature and walking?
I hope so. My children's school was great in primary school. They had a lot of outdoor classrooms, which I think are essential. I don't know if those are still running. My two are in comprehensive now, but I think, you know, it's all part of going back to sort of being a good citizen. I think that those outdoor classrooms are a real opportunity to talk about, you know, how to be outside in the countryside responsibly, but also to talk about well-being and ask children how they feel when they're outdoors. I think it's lovely.
I was thinking in my research for chatting to you about how, when I was younger, it seemed a very male domain. It was explorers and, you know, not necessarily macho writers going off like Jack Kerouac, Jack London, you know, Henry David Thoreau, perhaps. People like that who explored nature, wrote about it. It seemed a very male domain. And but recently I've discovered, you know, many different female writers: Olivia Lang, yourself, Rebecca Solnit. So I just wonder what you feel about. Do you think it has changed to be a bit more inclusive and gender balanced, that sort of world of nature writing, walking, etc.?
I think those women have always been there. I've got a brilliant book somewhere. I can't remember who it's by, which is awful, but it's about women who used to climb and hike in Victorian times, and in their full Victorian dress as well. And, you know, it always reminds me of that quote about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, with women doing what men do, but backwards in high heels. So you think they were climbing in the Alps in their full Victorian clothes, which I think is really, really brilliant. I think that history has probably for a very long time been written by men, and so those brilliant women have always been there, but it's only really in the last maybe 10-15 years that I think women are having more of a voice. I think we're re-examining the way that we look back at history now, and I think that it's great how things are changing, because I think those inspiring women have always been there. I've just finished a book actually called Bloody Brilliant Women, and it's about women's roles in all kinds of industries that you didn't really realize, or certainly I didn't when I was growing up. So I think it's I think that women certainly have a far more level playing field now in terms of writing, in terms of the arts, in terms of being visible, than certainly when I was growing up. But I think we still have a long way to go in terms of women's confidence. So I notice every time I hike that it's very rare to see a woman out hiking on her own. And so I've spoken to lots of friends and different groups about this, and women still don't have the confidence. And I think it's that in some cases they feel like they're not able to read a map or to know where they're going. And in other cases, they're worried about the safety implications, which is obviously a huge issue at the moment. So I think we've still got a lot of work to do in making women feel safer, and making women feel that they have the tools and the skills to go out and hike without necessarily needing a man to be there holding the map and carrying the big rucksack.
That's interesting. Yeah. I don't know if this is a similar sort of response, but I remember last couple of years with music gigs, there was a sort of a, quite a good dialogue going on, and a sort of campaign about women's safety at gigs, for example. Something that I didn't really realize would go on is harassment and touching and things at gigs. So it's almost like that was approached, and the mindset maybe was challenged. Do you think that's something similar about walking and the outdoor activities? It's almost like, do you think men can play their part as well with that sense of change?
I think we can all play our part. I don't want to put the onus solely on men. There are some fantastic walking groups. Some are for women only, but others are entirely inclusive of everybody who wants to turn up. And I think maybe the outdoor activities are slightly different from music gigs, because you take away the element of alcohol that is probably responsible for a lot. But I think that we all just it's hard to find a sort of easy solution to it, isn't it? But I think that women, how can I put this? I think there's still a lot to do to sort of inspire confidence in women that we have just as much capability as men. It's a really hard one to solve. Really hard one.
Yeah. So Rebecca, have you got any favourite trails that you could share with us?
Yeah, I've got lots of favourites. And Pen y Fan is beautiful. I tend to only go up there sort of early in the morning or later in the night, out of lockdown, obviously. I can't get there at the minute. But I love the Western Beacons, and that's the area where I started hiking, and they're so peaceful, far quieter, in my mind more spectacular, really beautiful places that seem steeped in legends and myths, quite wild. And sort of going over towards the Carmarthen Vans, sort of Llyn y Fan Fach, Llyn y Fan Fawr, those areas are beautiful. And then you've got Fan Gyhyrich and Fan Nedd in between, and they're very quiet, very spectacular and beautiful. I love hiking in the Ogwen Valley in Snowdonia as well. And my dad is from North Wales originally, so we had a lot of childhood holidays in North Wales and did a lot of climbing and scrambling there, which is just beautiful. But I think in lockdown, like lots of people, I've found out what's on my doorstep, and You know, we've got lovely walks. I live not too far from the Garth Mountain.
Oh, that's beautiful. The view up there is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can walk there from my doorstep, and then sort of further towards Llantrisant, and there's a beautiful little spot called the Cariad Stones, which is lovely. So I think in lockdown it's been great to just head off from home, and I'm quite nosy, so I just tend to look at a footpath or a sign and wonder where it goes, and just follow my nose, really. One of my favourite routes close to home actually is a little hill fort, and it's above quite a busy bypass, and you know, a lot of people use the bypass and don't really know that it's there. So I think even in urban areas, there's a lot around that we can all get out and find, really close to home.
And as you said, I think, because we've had to sort of been close to home, we've had to explore what is literally on our doorsteps. And for example, I live back on a mountain back onto my garden, and went up for a walk and found a reservoir on a place called Mynyddyslwyn, and this reservoir, I've lived in this area 50 odd years, you know, and I never found it before. It was like walking into, like, you know, I don't know, it's a new landscape, and it was really exciting. Yeah, talking of books and I suppose inspirations, obviously, you know, they must have played a part perhaps in fueling those moments, those catalysts perhaps of your love of walking and nature. Any recommendations of writers, books, etc., that have done that for you that you could share with us all? People you recommend?
Yeah, I think that one of the most poignant books I read recently was by a writer called Horatio Clare, and he wrote a beautiful book called The Light in the Dark, and it's about struggling through a really bleak winter, and he has depression. You know, he sort of manages that, and it's a very simple book. It's just about his day-to-day life with his family and getting outside every day and just noticing those very small moments. And similarly, I read Kate Humble's book recently, Thinking on My Feet, and that was her year through walking. And you know, I'm quite a big fan of what she has done and the kind of places she's been and what she's achieved. And again, I'm always drawn to those small details. So I get very obsessed with being out early when the light's coming up, and then later on at night when the darks come in, and just noticing how the same spot can change through the seasons, and how that makes me feel at each different time of the year. So those books, certainly a couple that I've read recently that have really triggered a lovely response, really. Another great one I read was Chris Packham's autobiography, and it's just beautifully written. I'm absolutely in awe of his writing. He's so talented at everything. But
what's that called? Just his autobiography?
Fingers in the Sparkle Jar, and that's got a beautiful cover as well.
He's great. I love him.
Just you know, beautiful detail of a childhood obsessed by nature. So very simple again, but wonderful.
Yes, well, thanks for all those recommendations, Rebecca. What's next for you with your blog, your walking? Are you working on anything new writing-wise at all?
Well, I am working on my 4th Walking Trails book, which is going very slowly, because obviously last year I wasn't able to reach a lot of the places that I wanted to write about. So it's kind of provisionally called Quiet Walks for Quiet Minds. And it's all about the peaceful places and how to find those peaceful places, how to get off the beaten track, how you can access them. But I just wanted to write about some of the lesser known spots in Wales. You know, people say, oh, I want to climb a mountain, I'll climb Pen y Fan, and I always think, well, there are other mountains available. So I'm just trying to highlight some of the other corners of South Wales, really, that people might want to reach. And I'll just continue my blog, because my blog is a bit of a mishmash of what's going on in my life and kit reviews, useful equipment to get out walking, but writing my blog, it's very personal, and it really helps me make sense of things that are going on in my life. So I'll continue to do that as well.
That sounds great. Okay, thank you. With these podcasts, I really want them to be, perhaps the word toolkit is overused these days with mental health and well-being, dissemination of information, etc. But yeah, I really believe, if we can offer tools for people to go out into the world and, maybe like a bit of armor in a way, and as this is the first podcast, so it's a bit of an experiment, but it's been great. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to find out what tools you could perhaps offer us in your magical toolkit, for to do with the way you live your life and what you believe and about mental health. That would be interesting.
I think there are some fantastic online communities which are very inclusive and very supportive. So, a lot of people want to go for a walk but think they're not going to be good enough or fit enough. But honestly, the Ordnance Survey online community, there are magazines like Trail and Country Walking, and they have initiatives like the 1,000-mile challenge. So actually that's walking only 2.7 miles a day, and you could do 1,000 miles in a year.
Wow.
And then there's another initiative called Mountains for the Mind, and these are full of very ordinary people of all fitness levels. So I would definitely recommend just joining some groups because they are very inclusive and welcoming. In terms of apps, maybe getting out with families, trying to encourage children to go walking. Geocaching is a really good tool because that gives children something to look for and some fun, something to do. I never used to tell my children we were going for a walk. I would say we're going on an adventure, or we're going to find something, or so there's lots of fantastic apps that families can use. But I'm a big fan of a good old-fashioned paper map as well. So, apps are obviously great when you've got good signal and you've got lots of battery on your phone. But I think if you're going to go slightly further afield and go on those more remote walks, then I'd really advocate taking a paper map in case your phone battery dies, and just being prepared, just taking more than you need, assuming the worst is going to happen. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
So you don't need to spend £500 on walking boots and everything else. Like sometimes you made to believe it's always like a fashion statement, isn't it?
No, absolutely, and that element of walking can be really off-putting. But again, there are great what's the word? Sorry, I can't think of the word. Sort of places online where people are buying and selling unwanted kits. You can pick things up really cheaply. Great stores like Go Outdoors. You can easily start a pair of walking boots for £30 and just see if it's for you or not.
Yeah.
Don't have to spend hundreds of pounds. No.